Hello and welcome to World News on TVP World. I'm Marie Cato. On Wednesday, US President Donald Trump suddenly paused part of his sweeping tariffs on global trading partners, even as he raised new tariffs on Chinese goods to 125%. Trump also said he had been thinking about a 90-day pause in the new tariff regime.
For a period of time, I wouldn't say this morning, over the last few days, I've been thinking about it. I've been dealing with Scott, with Howard, with some other people that are very professional. And I think it probably came together early this morning, fairly early this morning. Just wrote it up. We didn't have the use of, we didn't have access to lawyers, or we just wrote it up from our hearts, right? It was written from the heart. And I think it was well written too, but it was written from the heart. It was written as something that I think was very positive for the world and for us. And we don't want to hurt countries that don't need to be hurt, and they all want to negotiate. The only problem is, you can only do so many at one time. It's like, we want to do it right.
In a statement on X, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that the EU will put on a 90-day pause on its first countermeasures against US President Donald Trump's tariffs. This follows Trump's earlier announcement that he will pause his latest tariffs, though the levies on steel and cars are to remain in force. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has said that maintaining close transatlantic relations is a common responsibility of both the EU and the US. In a social media post, the head of the Polish government went on to say that the coming 90 days of US tariff pauses should be put to good use by European officials.
Maintaining close transatlantic relations is a common responsibility of Europeans and Americans, regardless of temporary turbulences. So let's make the best of the next 90 days.
The EU enlargement boss Marta Kos said that negotiations for Ukraine to join the bloc are ongoing, but Hungary is making things tricky. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins gets into the weeds of this thorny accession debate from Brussels.
Ukrainian accession to join the EU sat at the core of a press conference at the beginning of the EU-Ukraine Business Summit in Brussels. Now, it comes off the back of the EU Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, telling reporters of the benefits if Ukraine joins the EU. We're talking about the single market as well as deeper investment in renewable energy as well as defence. But the elephant in the room is Hungary, which has previously torpedoed any accession negotiation talks and has blocked the opening of those accession clusters. Let's take a listen to what that EU official had to say when pressed about this from reporters.
The whole European Commission team, around 1,000 people in Brussels, are working on this every day. We could end all the screening processes in this year, so we will be ready when the Council will be able to bring the conclusion to open all the clusters. I am sure that this will be able in this year. But of course, we have to work also with Hungary.
But Poland has also made Ukrainian accession a centrepiece of its EU Council presidency, which started in January and winds up in June. TVP World asked Poland's EU Affairs Minister Adam Szłapka, who was in the Belgian capital on Thursday, what he is doing to close this deal for Kyiv. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about the Hungarian problem.
We are talking about that. We know the circumstances, we know who is blocking that, and we need to talk. The unanimity is needed.
But there are other things on the agenda in the Belgian capital for this summit. We're talking about how to invest wisely in wartime, as well as predictability as Ukraine edges closer towards that EU accession. But one thing is clear from this event, that the EU not only supports Ukraine on the battlefield, but also in the boardroom. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
There is an ongoing debate in Brussels about unifying arms procurement and consolidating defence production. The multitudes of systems used across Europe right now make interoperability next to impossible, so this would be a step forward. But many argue that such a consolidation would make procurement more expensive. The deputy head of the Polish armament agency, General Michał Marciniak, was a guest on TVP World's The Bottom Line on Wednesday and offered his perspective.
I don't think that it will be more expensive. What I'm afraid of is that as of today, the whole European industry is very divided and they compete each other. If we want to be some kind of the counterweight against the US industry, US defense industry, the European industry should be united, but united with all size of the companies. I mean, the unification shouldn't be done through the collection in one big industry, because we have very strong Western industry, German or the French, and if we unite with all industries with different capabilities, I think that it would be the key for success. And I wouldn't be afraid about the price, because this is the still place for negotiations. Mm-hmm. But I cannot compete with France, for example, in the missile area, because it doesn't make sense.
Of course.
So this is the biggest problem, in my opinion, of course.
We cannot rely on the Americans for our security. Europeans must be capable of defending their continent on their own, said former Latvian Defence Minister Artis Pabriks, discussing the concerns over potential US military withdrawal from the European Union.
One thing is what we would like to wish, and we believe that in the long-term interests of Transatlantic Alliance is that Americans are present and staying in Europe, and particularly in so-called Northern and Eastern Europe, where we are located, because this is where possible aggression might come from. But secondly, we cannot rely our security only to Americans. And here the White House and US is correct. Europeans must be capable to defend their continent alone and themselves. And that is again a question to our Western neighbors, our Western colleagues, which are not neither spending enough still for the security and defense, nor taking politically these threats seriously, because despite of all the good talks, I still would say that understanding of threat is very different in Baltics and Poland on one hand, and for instance in some other Western countries on the other hand. The threat perception is different, and that makes also different actions.
The United States and Russia carried out another prisoner swap on Thursday in Abu Dhabi, according to media reports citing the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. Among those released is Ksenia Karelina, a Russian-American ballerina who was sentenced to 12 years in a penal colony for treason after donating around $50 to a U.S.-based charity supporting Ukraine. In return, the U.S. freed Arthur Petrov, a German-Russian citizen arrested in Cyprus in 2023 for exporting sensitive microelectronics. This marks the second U.S.-Russia prisoner swap since Donald Trump began his second term in office in January. US and Russian officials are holding low-level talks in Istanbul on Thursday. The sides deny, however, that political or security issues, including Ukraine, will be discussed. The U.S. delegation is headed by U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Sonata Coulter, while Russia is represented by its ambassador to the U.S. The talks will cover what the Americans describe as, quote, embassy operations and not bilateral relations as a whole. The Kremlin echoed those statements, adding that Ukraine is, quote, absolutely not on the agenda. It was a good night for Robert Lewandowski fans as the Barcelona striker netted twice in a convincing 4-0 Champions League first leg quarter-final against his old club, Borussia Dortmund.
Barcelona will take a 4-goal advantage to Dortmund next Tuesday after a strong attacking performance. Rafinha opened the scoring and Robert Lewandowski headed in just after half-time. The Pole scored a second against his old side with a powerful finish 20 minutes later. And Lamine Yamal poked in a through ball to make it 4.
Of course, 4-0 is a good result for the first game, but we still have to play in Dortmund. I know Dortmund. I know how the fans support the team. It really is an outstanding atmosphere. One of the best teams I know.
On Thursday evening, Legia Warszawa will host Chelsea in the Europa Conference League quarter-finals. The Blues have won their last 6 Conference League games and led the league phase table with 18 points, while Legia were 7th in the table with 12 points. Meanwhile, Jagiellonia Białystok are in Spain this evening for their Europa Conference League quarter-final against Real Betis.
And now to tell us more about these exciting sports developments, I am joined by TVP World sports reporter John Carter. Hello and thank you for joining me in the studio.
Nice to be here, Marie.
So Robert Lewandowski, he is in great form. He was in great form last night playing against Borussia Dortmund. Why and how is he having such a prolific season?
Well, mainly because he's surrounded by excellent attacking players, which is really fundamentally bringing out the best in him. So, I mean, some of the stats this season are just incredible. And so he scored his 104th and 105th Champions League goal ever, and he became the first player to score 10-plus goals for 3 different teams. So it just shows not only is he having a brilliant season, but he's just been incredibly consistent at the very highest level over...
Despite his age.
Despite his age, so 36 years old. And I think this is actually kind of poignant because at 36, he's actually surrounded by very young teammates. A lot of guys, teenagers and early 20s. So this is kind of accommodating for him. You know, you have some other younger players doing a little bit more of the running for him. That's not to say he's not in incredible shape as well. He really is able to last the full 90 minutes and still be incredibly explosive. But yeah, I just feel like the circumstances are just right for him. You know, so he had some of his most prolific seasons when he was at Bayern Munich, where they were at their very strongest. And this Barcelona team, it has echoes of that in terms of their strength and attacking potency. So that's really why it seems to be bringing out the best in him. Players who want to provide assists, who take pleasure in putting the ball on a plate for him.
We all love Robert Lewandowski, but I want to know about some other polls perhaps that have impressed us in this last quarter-final.
Certainly, yeah. Well, we shouldn't forget about Wojciech Szczęsny, of course, who also played in the Barcelona team. He was solid again last night, and he's after a shaky start to the season and some, you know, iffy moments, he's really coming to the fore as well. You know, he only came out of retirement near the beginning of this season, so he's been very impressive. In Tuesday night's game, Arsenal-Real Madrid, we saw Jakub Kiwior, who has been quite criticised, I'd have to say.
Fairly or unfairly, do you think?
I think some of the criticism has been fair, in the sense that at the very, very highest level, there have been suggestions that he might be out of his depth. However, on Tuesday, he faced the likes of Mbappe, Bellingham, Vinicius Junior. So
some real stars.
The most potent attack in Europe, arguably. And he played extremely well. He's very solid. So I think we're seeing signs as well that he is possibly up to that standard. Yeah, mention as well for Nikola Zalewski, who also featured for Inter Milan. So it's great to see there's 4 of Poland's best players at the very highest level in the Champions League quarter-final, and performing as well, not just featuring.
Well, just before we go, if I've got the details right, this evening Polish clubs Legia Warsaw and Jagiellonia Białystok, they play this evening in the Europa Conference League quarterfinals?
That's correct, right? Yes.
What are their chances?
Well, very tricky because they face arguably the 2 most tricky teams of the remaining 8 in the Europa Conference League quarterfinals. So Legia face Chelsea, who are the clear favourites for the competition. And Legia will be hoping to get a result because they're playing Warsaw here this evening. And so I think it's vital that they don't lose that match and they can go into the away leg with a slight chance. Jagiellonia, I think they have a slightly better chance. They face Real Betis in Spain this evening, and it's going to be really tough. But they've been very fortunate and played extremely well, both teams throughout the competition, so I certainly wouldn't rule them out.
OK, well, we'll check in with you tomorrow and see how things go. Thanks so much, John Carter.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of World News at 2 p.m. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.